Risk attitudes. This is more of a soft thing about feelings and kind of emotional reactions to risk. So all of us come to various risk scenarios with some already built-in assumptions about risk, and those are something that need to be dealt with when you're managing risk. And then finally, risk tolerance. Now, this is a much more particular word in the risk management field, where one of the things you need to do when you're starting to work on a risk management plan for an organization is understand the risk tolerance or appetite. And there are 3 key terms that are used: risk averse, so an organization that does what it can to minimize risk exposure; risk seeking, where organizations are willing to take a chance in order to find opportunities; or risk neutral. And risk neutral approaches try to balance risk and payoff, and that's really the part I've tried to hit in how I've brought forward this risk managed approach, is thinking about that balance. Given that I don't think a lot of nonprofits are really able to put themselves in a purely risk-seeking type mode. I could be wrong. So as I mentioned, all of these approaches contribute to a corporate risk profile, which is an essential part of the beginning of creating a risk management plan in the planning process, which I'll speak about later. So a different kind of take on approaches. I want to talk about a couple of scenarios that you might be familiar with where risk management's happening in the organization. So I've given these kind of mottos, the first being be prepared. So this is the kind of risk management approach that probably most of the people in this room have been engaged in, which is a more traditional liability and compliance model. It's driven primarily by legal and financial concerns, as well as issues of compliance. There's a focus on developing corporate instruments, policies and procedures, ensuring that the appropriate types of insurance are in place for the organization, financial planning, and spending controls. These are often driven by the board of directors to ensure capacity to respond to threats and to ensure that obligations of the organization are met. And often accountants and lawyers play a key part in this activity. In the final page of the presentation, I've included a list of resources. And one of the resources I've included for you is a checklist that comes from a law firm here in Ontario that's aimed at nonprofits that you may find useful. Really takes you through a lot of the checklist issues of risk that organizations have to deal with in this really threat response type mode to thinking about risk management. And that's the document. There's a link, there's a URL for the document online. I'm not sure if I've used this one right, but it came to my mind, which was one does not plan to fail, but fails to plan. And this is probably a little bit more dear to my heart as a project manager. Risk management is a core element of project management methodology. And you really need to plan for project success by anticipating threats to project completion, quality, and satisfaction. And those risks that can affect that, that can create those kinds of threats, are associated with scope, resources, and schedule. And scope, resources, and schedule are the triple constraint, the triple threat of project management. I don't know how familiar you are with project management methodology, but all projects are constrained by scope, resources, and schedule. So looking at threats to that, we'll have the threats will tend to either impact the outcome of the project, the quality of the project, or perhaps the client or end user satisfaction with the project. So the emphasis in a project management approach to risk management is on risk identification, evaluation, response, monitoring, and control. And that's the process we're going to talk about today when we get to the process section. And really, I think project management methodologies contributed the most to helping people think of a very tactical process to tackle risk management. The other key thing to note is that risk management in project management starts at the very beginning of a project. and should continue through the life cycle. But one of the things I'm going to want to talk about as a critical success factor is the fact that oftentimes people fill out that risk chart that comes in the project charter at the beginning of their projects, and then they never go back to it. And they do it at a time where some of the issues of the project really haven't started to show their heads yet. So there's some initial sense that people have about what might come along, or they've gotten some guidance about what it means to think about risk, but they haven't really taken the opportunity to use that risk analysis to really effectively project manage. And I think that's something that I'd like to advocate for, because I often see those parts of the charter kind of get put away as soon as they're written, and I think they become most effective when they stay active. They come back to the table in project status reports. They're reevaluated on a regular basis as new things occur, especially over longer projects. Finally, I want to talk about strategic risk management, and this is a newer concept that I think is already present in some of the nonprofit literature about risk management, and it's really thinking about a broader approach to organizational risk management. And here's your jargon. It's often called integrated risk management or enterprise risk management. And really all that means is that you need to bring together all the risk management activities in the organization and then approach them with a coordinated view of planning, review, evaluation, and updating. You want to link strategic and operational planning activities and risk management approaches. And how many people in this room have been involved in a strategic planning exercise? How many people have done a SWOT analysis? Really, a SWOT analysis is the beginning of a risk management analysis. So you've got your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. So you're already starting to think in that mode. What are the opportunities and threats of my organization? How can I take that same approach and link it to how I think about risk management as it occurs on a more daily basis in my projects across my organization? That's where we really want to make that connection out from strategy and operational planning, which often happens with executive directors, executive team, and board without staff around the table, or without sort of middle managers or people with supervisory responsibility. And what we really need to do is make that connect backwards and forwards across the organization so management stays aware of risk issues as they emerge over the daily course of operations of an organization, and the staff get a chance to be connected to the leadership view and the strategy view of why they're doing what they're doing and why response needs to be considered when you're thinking about risk. So I got all passionate there. Really, I think what we're looking at doing here is extending the risk management approach and related principles to ongoing planning and decision making, and really making sure that that's backed up by leadership, communication, policies and tools, and really active management to make sure that people are actually engaged in the risk management activities that have been outlined for them. So here's another somewhat jargony thing. It's a risk management maturity model. So you'll see that there are various steps and stages along the maturity model. And the first stage, ad hoc, really speaks to no risk management plan, but really just responding to risks as they emerge and threats, and opportunities for that matter. The initial phase is beginning to experiment with risk management approaches, so sometimes tackling them in projects, perhaps doing a board exercise to identify liability issues and to identify risk issues at a senior level. But not having a standardized methodology, not having a centralized documentation for risks or the risk management plan, but really just dealing with them as one-off activities. And then you're moving towards repeatable. So in the repeatable model, you've got more of a standardized methodology and a plan. There's clearer establishment of roles and responsibilities across the organization. People understand what role they play in risk management, and the whole process has more integration and control across the organization. Managed is kind of the mecca of risk management, which I don't know is really achievable or accomplishable by most public sector and private businesses, let alone nonprofits, because it's really about very much a data-driven kind of business intelligence approach to thinking about how everything knits together in a real-time response model. So we'll just leave that alone. But I want to talk about the fact that strategic risk management, which I've mentioned as a priority, begins towards the end of the second phase, the initial phase, and that in my experience, it seems that most nonprofits are moving from ad hoc to initial, but that repeatable is their target and can be their target, I think, without really taking them too far off course. And that the public sector is moving from initial to repeatable, or is irrepeatable but striving for managed. And I think I'm being gracious here because I think that methodologically speaking, I think that a lot of public sector organizations have in place risk management methodologies, but whether they actually filter down to the departmental level and actually get used in programs and projects, I haven't seen that. I haven't seen the really proactive strategic approach in my experience, but mine is just a small slice. Public sector risk management, the trends in that I think are really important to watch, especially since the principles and policies and methods of funding agencies can really affect the expectation for literacy organizations and other nonprofits. And I think what we're seeing is a real theme around principles of accountability, transparency, and a results-based focus. And I'm sure all those terms are very familiar to you all in how you're dealing with your funders and how you're thinking about program delivery at this point in the life cycle of literacy organizations. And I think that that language is very closely tied to risk management as well. So I'm going to move on and talk about sources and types of risk. Does anyone have any questions at this point before I move on? You okay? Okay. So where are risks coming from? What we're trying to identify here is what could happen in an organization, how what might happen would play out, who would be affected, when would it be likely to occur, how could it occur, or what will trigger it. These are the kinds of questions that we're starting to brainstorm about when we sit down and say, what could happen in my organization today, tomorrow, or next month? What could happen in this project today, tomorrow, or next month? So when we think about looking for risks, we look internally to the organization. And the examples here are security, so the physical security of a building, IT security for systems and whether there's backups in place, and database password protection. Knowledge management, is there a way that the organization's actually capturing the knowledge of its employees in the event that they leave, to keep that knowledge inside the organization? Staff, issues with staff in terms of capacity, in terms of performance and behavior, in terms of health and safety and wellness. Externally, we tend to think a little broader. We think about political changes, economic changes, and disasters, all of which seem to be in the news a lot these days. So I would say that due to things like H1N1 and natural disasters happening in different parts of the world, it's another reason why risk management methodologies and mindsets are again rising to larger prominence as people think about response and business continuity and continuity planning and the role that risk management has to play about that. On the project-based side, the parameters are a little clearer because projects tend to be constrained. So budget, schedule, resource availability, the role of stakeholders or partners, costs, and I'm hoping you're all familiar with this word, scope creep. Anyone? No? Scope creep is the fear of every project manager and people working on a project. And it's got to do with when the original parameters of a project are defined. What is the project intended to do? What objectives should it meet? What deliverables should it produce? and that is set. It should be set in the project charter as part of the project management process. But when it starts to evolve on the course of the project,